Peace and light, family. I hope that you are well. So this is part 2 of the series, How to Find Yourself. I promised you guys at the end of part 1 that I would not leave you with these open wounds and this triggered trauma without telling you how to heal it. So this particular video is about how to heal the trauma and surviving depression. Because as we know, when we think about our trauma and as we work through our trauma, depression may be a side effect of that. So in this video, I'll discuss some ways that I personally survived my depression as well as my methods for healing trauma. Let's get started. So how do we know our trauma has been triggered? Honestly, it is a holistic feeling. It is a physical, mental, and spiritual feeling when your trauma has been triggered. Physically, it can feel like having a warm feeling in the pit of your stomach, that uncomfortable, uneasy feeling. Your stomach turns. For some people, they physically break out in hives. They start to feel hot. A lot of physical responses happen when our past trauma has been triggered. And then the mental response that follows the physical response is we start thinking about and sometimes overthinking on that trauma. For example, if you were molested, you may start thinking about exactly what happened when you were molested. You may start replaying the narrative or the story in your mind. If you were abused, you start thinking about the abuse. And sometimes you even start feeling it again. It feels like it's happening all over again, which is causing even more of a physical response. Then spiritually, it takes a huge toll because this is when emotions come into play. This is when you start feeling sad, you start feeling down. And as that narrative is playing over and over in your mind, you start to feel those spiritual and emotional triggers of sadness, of anger, of depression, of anxiety. So let's figure out how we work through that. Honestly, my first recommendation is that you feel the feels, okay? Allow yourself to feel those feelings. Allow yourself to sit in those feelings. Give yourself the room to grieve your trauma. That is okay. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel hurt. Allow yourself to feel those feelings that are accompanied with someone who has been through trauma. I feel like oftentimes we tell ourselves, no, I can't be angry. We force ourselves to push past the trauma, push through the emotion. Sometimes you just need to sit down and be sad for a minute. You need to sit down and grieve yourself, grieve that experience, grieve for the childhood that may have been lost, grieve for that part of your life that may have been damaged or lost or stolen in some cases. Grieve that. Feel your feelings. Cry if you need to, scream if you need to. Don't wait around for someone else to understand or for someone else to give you permission, consent, support. Support yourself through that moment. Support yourself through the grief. And you support yourself through the grief by allowing yourself the space, the room, and giving yourself the permission to grieve. Feel your feelings, people. Now, the thing with feeling those feelings is sometimes those feelings can kind of get overwhelming, and that's when they turn into depression and they turn into anxiety and things like that. When you sit and dwell in those feelings for just a little too long, or sometimes those feelings come on just too strong for us to be able to process in a short period of time, it turns into, beyond just a feeling of sadness, beyond just I want to cry, it turns into a deep depression. And everyone who has been through an extreme traumatic experience, if you are on the road to healing through that, you will experience some sort of depression. And this is when I'm about to get very personal. So I myself experienced a lot of childhood trauma. I experienced a lot of trauma very young, various different forms of abuse, and some things that I'll share in a later video. However, I went to Ethiopia, and when I went to Ethiopia, I told the universe, I prayed to God, I said, listen, I want to heal any and every little part of me that I'm even hiding from myself. I need to finish my healing process. So anything that I may be fighting against with healing, anything I may be trying to avoid, show it. Show me myself so that I can finish healing this trauma, because I knew that something in me was still brewing, something in me was still hurting, and I wanted to figure that out. So I asked the universe to show me who I am and show me the parts of me that still needed to heal. Now, this is the thing. You know how grandma used to say, be careful what you pray for because you're going to get it. Y'all, I got it, okay? What the universe revealed to me was that I had not finished healing the parts of my childhood trauma that involved my mom. I spent much of my time, and I always spend a lot of time like crediting my mom for my success and giving her a lot of like credit and praise for the woman that I am today, and like so much of like my foundation with spirituality, with herb work, and so many other things I learned from my mother. However, what I realized when I was on this journey of healing that trauma, I realized that just as much credit as I give her for my success, I have the right to credit her for some of my trauma as well. I'm going to say that again because this revelation was life-changing for me. Just as much credit as I gave my mother for my success, I had to give myself permission and tell myself I have the right to also credit her for some of my trauma. I used to feel guilty about that. I used to feel guilty about speaking on my mother in a negative way or speaking and sharing some of the trauma that I experienced because, you know, we are taught that you praise your parents and you give them respect and all of that, which I agree with that. So I was always very hesitant about sharing my experiences that I had growing up with her. My mother had a mental disability. She struggled with severe bipolar disorder, as well as she had some issues with addiction. So there was a lot of trauma there growing up with her, but I was scared to tell it because, you know, I never wanted to hurt her. I never want her to feel guilty or bad about it. And then I also just, you know, a child should always respect their mother and father, so I always just very hesitant about speaking on that. However, when I started this journey of healing that trauma, I had to give myself the right, the permission to speak on it. And if I didn't speak on it, I could not heal from it because me not speaking on it also was me hiding it from myself. So I worked through those steps of identifying what that trauma was and allowing myself to feel the feelings associated with that trauma. Now I'm about to really like get personal, you guys. So when I was allowing myself to feel the feelings of that trauma, it really specifically, it brought me back to a specific experience that I had where, I'm not going to give all the details right now, but essentially I was eating out of a shoebox in the closet. I used to have to hide food in the closet at one point, and I would go to the closet and sneak and eat food out of the closet because, you know, things just was crazy. So what I had to do was I had to really like sit in that moment, and that particular moment just kept replaying in my mind over and over and over and over, and I had to really sit in it and ask myself, why was this moment so traumatic for you? How did you feel in that moment? What effects did that moment have on you? And I felt those feelings. I felt lonely. I felt sad. I was anxious in those moments. I felt like no one understood. I felt like I had nothing in those moments, and I had to work through those feelings. So the first thing I did was, after I identified how I felt in that moment, I allowed myself to grieve as though I was still in that moment. Because when it was happening, I did not cry. When it was happening, I was trying to be strong. I was trying to hold on, push through it, block it out, so many other things, everything to avoid from dealing with the circumstance that I was in as a child. So as an adult, sitting in that hotel room in Ethiopia, replaying this experience in my mind, seeing myself at that closet, seeing myself trying to hurry up and scarf something down before she came in the room and caught me, like seeing that over and over and over, I allowed myself to grieve as though I was still in that moment, feel those feelings that I actually felt in that time and express them. So I gave myself permission to grieve. However, it turned into depression because I could not stop playing that moment. 1 day passed, 2 days passed, 3 days passed, and I was still feeling those feelings. And that's when it became depression for me. When I realized that, okay, this is not just a moment of me grieving. I'm still crying about this. This is now the 3rd day and I'm still crying about this. And I started feeling sad. And although a lot of positive things was happening around me, and this is what depression looks like a lot of times for a lot of people, A lot of positive things were happening around me. I was solo traveling through Africa. I'm in Ethiopia. I'm by myself. I feel brave. I feel strong. It's great. I wanted to come to Ethiopia so bad. I'm finally here. I'm literally on the balcony of a hotel looking over Ethiopia. I'm staring at the mountains. So many great things are happening. But that feeling, those feelings of that moment just would not get away from me. And that's when I knew, like, okay, you're depressed, girl. Like, this is now depression. I remember talking to a friend of mine and he was like, are you okay? And I was explaining to him what happened and like how I was feeling. And he was like, it sounds to me like you're depressed. And I was like, I know. And for me, it was like kind of shocking because I honestly had never felt like I experienced depression before. But that is what it looked like for me. It looked and felt like multiple days of grieving, and I couldn't bring myself out of it. So some things that may trigger depression for other people, it could be that trauma. It could be feeling those feelings. It could be a lot of like asking yourself, why did that happen to me? Why did I have to experience that? It could be a lot of dwelling on the negative effects that that trauma has had on your life. It could be a lot of like questioning yourself and who you are for allowing certain things to happen to you. Depression can be triggered by so many things, but I think we all have a common feeling of what depression looks like. And that common feeling is, it feels like there's no way out of it. It feels like long-term grieving, a lot of sadness, a lot of crying, a lot of like feeling disconnected to the things and the people around you, feeling disconnected from the moment that you are living in right now. And a lot of that disconnection is because instead of living in the moment, we are living in that trauma. Instead of living in the moment, we are living in that trauma. And that trauma is what's triggering our disconnection and what's triggering our depression. So how do we pull ourselves up out of that depression and regain our lives? Let's go. So to survive depression, the first thing I had to do was recognize that I was depressed. I had to recognize that I was not living in the moment. I had to recognize that I was disconnected. I had to recognize that I was sad, that I was angry. I had to recognize that I just was not happy in that moment. So acknowledging that you are depressed is step one of surviving depression. Step 2 to survive depression is I had to start naming the moment that I was living in. And I started it off with my I am mantras. If you guys watch my videos, you know how much I love my I am mantras. And when you say I am and then you describe who you are, so I am well, I am healthy. When you name these things, you are calling this energy unto yourself. So I had to regain my moment by reminding myself of who and where and what I am. So I had to just start saying over and over, I am well, I am happy, I am free, I am traveling, I am here, I am okay, I am alive, I am away from the trauma, I am removed from the trauma, I am healed from the trauma. I just started saying a bunch of I am statements over and over and over. In my journal, I started writing them over and over and over. And that was step 2 of reminding myself of the space I am in now. Removing myself from that trauma, keep putting myself back into the moment by saying, I am no longer there, I am here. I am no longer in my past, I am in my present, and presently this is who I am. Step 3 for bringing myself out of that depression was I had to focus on the lessons. I had to have a true SANKOFA experience. And for those of you who don't know what SANKOFA is a Twi word that comes from Ghana. And that word simply means to gain knowledge in the past, use it in the present to manifest a better future. So I had to have a true SANKOFA experience by reflecting on what lessons did I learn in that moment. When I was in that closet, when I was going through that trauma, what lessons did I learn in that moment? Lessons from the past. How have those lessons benefited me in present day? From that trauma of that closet experience, I learned that I was strong. I learned that I was a survivor because I was going to eat by any means necessary. I was going to make sure I had food in my belly. I learned that I had community because it was my neighbors who were bringing me food and sneaking me food so that I can be able to eat something. So I learned that there are people in this world who care. There is community out here. Those are lessons I learned from that moment of the past. How have I used those lessons in the present? In the present, I used that strength to get me through so many situations. That feeling of community, I used that moment of realizing that it's people out here who love. There's people out here who care. There's people out here who will help you out. I used that in the present by not being afraid to ask for help. So all of those lessons from the past, I was using in the present. And that strength, that ability to ask for help, that love for my community will help me manifest a better future. So have that SANKOFA experience with your trauma, and that will help bring you out of your depression. Identify what lessons, what knowledge, what wisdom did you gain from that past trauma? How has it benefited you right now? How are you using it right now? Or how will you use it right now to help you manifest a better future? Surviving depression, y'all, it's possible. It's not easy. Trust me. It took me a little minute to get up out that thing, but I got out of it, and I'm here today. Use those 3 steps. Acknowledge that you have that depression, you guys, and use those 3 steps to heal. Now, once we have identified that trauma and we have felt those feelings, and those feelings may have led to depression, and you survived that depression, you come up out of that depression, we ain't done yet. We still got to heal that trauma. We got to heal ourselves from that trauma of the past. So let's get on to some steps that we can take to heal the trauma. The first thing we have to do is identify what are some coping mechanisms that you have gained from your trauma. Coping mechanisms simply mean what are things that you have done, what are identity traits that you have taken on that helped you survive that trauma. Now, coping mechanisms can be healthy or unhealthy, and we have to identify the coping mechanisms and then place them on which side they're on. Once again, I'll use myself as an example. Now, from some of the trauma from my childhood, coping mechanisms that I have is it made me stronger. So having a strength by being able to push through and being resilient. So strength, resilience, these are healthy coping mechanisms and identity traits, because coping mechanisms and identity traits are usually interchangeable. So these are healthy coping mechanisms and identity traits that I gained from that experience. But I'm gonna be real and get into some unhealthy stuff now. What I had to realize was that from my trauma, I also had gained the coping mechanism of emotionally detaching. That was a part of how I became so strong. That was a part of how I became so resilient. I emotionally detached from those moments. That was an unhealthy coping mechanism. Yes. Did it make me stronger? Yes. Did it make me resilient? Absolutely. But that emotional detachment had a lot of negative effects on relationships that I had, friendships that I had. That emotional detachment just simply was not healthy for me. So once you identify what are those positive and negative coping mechanisms from your trauma, the healthy and unhealthy coping mechanisms from your trauma, you have to decide which ones do you want to work on and which ones do you want to keep. Which do you want to throw away and which do you want to hold on to? Which ones have served you well and which ones is it time to let go of because they are no longer serving your supreme energy? And you got to be real with yourself in this process. When you are identifying these coping mechanisms, yes, being strong is good. Being resilient is good. But is being emotionally detached healthy? Is that emotional detachment a healthy thing? Has it served you well? For me, the answer was no, it hadn't. So I identified those coping mechanisms from my trauma, and then I knew that some of them, yes, I wanted to keep, but some of them I had to let go of. And then I had some that was in the middle. Some that was in the middle where I want to keep this, but I need to tweak that a little bit, okay? You want to keep it, but you got to tweak it. So it's okay to have that list as well. Those coping mechanisms that you like and they have served you well, but they also may be starting to become detrimental, or they may be starting to serve you well in certain areas, but not so well in others. I'm going to say this one for my ladies, okay? That independence. Independence has become a coping mechanism for some people. Some of us as women, we may have grown up without fathers. We may have grown up without helpmates. We may have grown up without people that we felt like we can rely on. So a coping mechanism, a way that we dealt with that trauma, was we became independent. We became the type that I can do it for myself. I can fix the car. I can make the money. I can do everything for myself and cook and clean and this and that, and I can raise the kids and yada, 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 right? So we become independent, which, yes, that's a great thing sometimes. Yes, you want to be able to earn your own money. Yes, you want to be able to change that tire if you need to. However, there are a lot of situations where that independence could be a person who doesn't like to ask for help, a person who doesn't acknowledge when they need or want or desire a helpmate. So you may want to tweak that coping mechanism a little bit, and that's okay to do that. So overall, when we are working through healing our trauma, we want to first identify our trauma. Then we want to allow ourselves to feel our feelings. And then if our feelings get a little too overwhelming, if our feelings become a little too much, they may turn into a depression. But depression does not mean the end of healing. Depression is just a moment of healing. So focus on that guide to how to survive depression. Please, it works. It works for me. It still helps me in moments that I may not be feeling my best. It still helps me out. So survive that depression. Once we survive that depression, we can get right back on that road to healing our trauma and understanding what coping mechanisms have I gained from my trauma, and are these coping mechanisms healthy or unhealthy? Which ones do I want to keep, hold on to because they do serve my supreme energy? Which ones do I need to let go of? And which ones are in the middle that I kind of do want to keep, but I may need to start tweaking a little bit? In the next video, part 3, I'll talk about how do we work on some of these coping mechanisms so that they are of our benefits and we can overcome that trauma and continue to finish healing that trauma, and which ones, how do we let go of those coping mechanisms that no longer serve our supreme energy. I love you, family. Thank you for watching, supporting. Thank you for subscribing. I'm appreciative of each and every one of you. We are a community. We are a family. Feel free to give each other advice in the comments. Feel free to reach out for advice or for further support. I'm always here. I love and appreciate all of you, family. Much love. Let's heal together.